Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video features true scary stories sent in from viewers like you. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. A few years ago, my brothers and I would go on midnight bike rides during the summer. This happened for weeks without any strange events or a reason to be afraid. Yes, it was midnight and the streets were only lit by streetlights, but it was still thrilling to do. I'm a paranoid person, so even though I had no reason to be afraid, I still was. We would ride our bikes in close proximity to our neighborhood. My brothers and I lived in a nicer area, the suburbs, I guess you could say. With that being said, my guard was down and even more, because I knew nothing sketchy really ever happened in my city. One night, around 11 p.m., my brothers and cousins went on a bike ride and I decided not to go. They left for their bike ride and about 20 minutes later they texted me to meet them at the park that was up the street from my house. I called them and said, "No, I don't feel like it, maybe next time." 5 minutes later, I got this boost of energy and ended up walking to the park, thinking they were already there. As I said before, the park is just up the street from my house, but I was still paranoid walking by myself. The time was around 11:30 p.m. when I got to the park. To my surprise, they weren't there yet, because they were coming from the bike ride they usually went on. That left me having to sit at the park and wait until they returned. I was waiting not even 5 minutes, and I see these two young girls that are walking in my direction. As they emerge from the darkness, I realize they're coming right for me, and my heart sinks. They asked me if they could use my phone. They said that their boyfriend left them in this neighborhood and need him to pick them up. This was very confusing to me, but I let them use my phone, because I couldn't imagine being in their shoes in this type of situation. As they were using my phone, my brothers and cousin pull up on their bikes, and I feel a little relieved. They got off the phone, thanked me, and walked back in the direction they came. I told them what happened and soon forgot about it, because we began playing the game Groundies on the playground. About 20 minutes later, I see that just one of the girls is walking back towards the park. I thought this was strange because where did her friend go? They were supposed to get picked up, right? She walks up to me again and asks to use my phone because she didn't know where her friend went. This was sketchy to me, but I'll still let her use it. The same thing happens. She uses it, thanks me, and walks into the night. We all thought this was a bit weird. Since the girls didn't know the neighborhood and we did, my brother waited 5 minutes and rode his bike in the direction she came. He comes back and says, "I don't see her. I went all around the neighborhood and can't find her unless she's hiding on someone's porch." This was weird because she couldn't have gone far. This made us leave the park. I forgot to mention, the entire time we were at the park, there was this van that kept driving around the neighborhood with the lights off. It probably had nothing to do with the girls, but it was just so sketchy. When we got home, I called that number to see if the girl was okay, or if she got picked up. The call went straight to voicemail, so I texted asking if she was okay. I got a text back and it said, "Who is this?" And I replied with, "Your girlfriend used my phone to call you for a ride. I was just making sure she was okay." He then texted back and said, "I don't have a girlfriend." At this point, I was a little worried for the girls, but there was nothing more I could do. The next morning, I got a text from the number saying, "Who is this? What's your name?" And at this point, I decided to block the number because it felt so wrong. Why was he still texting me? I blocked the number and the story ends there. As time went on, I began to question if this was some type of sex trafficking setup, because the whole situation was too bizarre. Another thing I should mention, we continued to ride bikes and hang out at the park after midnight, and we would still see that van driving around the neighborhood, with no lights on. After this, we decided to take a break from our after-hour adventures before something bad happened to us. Story number 2. As a kid, I always enjoyed going to our local neighborhood park. My friends and I would ride our bikes there every evening after dinner. My parents were always fine with us staying out until dark, as long as we rode home immediately after. This happened in late June, so it was light past 10 p.m. When my friends and I arrived at the park, it was 8 o'clock. The park was bustling with families enjoying themselves and the summer heat. My pals and I spent our first hour there playing basketball and tossing around a frisbee. Time got away from me during our fun activities, and I checked my watch. It was 9:45 p.m., and the darkness was starting to fall upon us. My friend noticed that a small pickup truck had pulled up in front of the park. None of our parents had this make or model of vehicle. We thought nothing of it at first, and were just enjoying our final minutes at the park before returning home. This truck had 2 people inside from what I could make of it. The windows were very tinted and it was hard to get a good view inside. My friends and I decided to pack things up and make our way for my house. We made it to our bikes and just started pedaling. As soon as we did, the car started up and began following us very slowly. The car's headlights were off, which was so scary. My friend screamed as the car slammed into his bike. My other friend and I stopped for a moment and looked back. As I turned around, our youngest friend was being picked up off the pavement by a large man and a creepy lady. He was screaming and kicking for all he was worth, trying to free himself. We were only 10-year-old kids. My friend and I had no choice but to keep pedaling and find help immediately. We raced home and told my parents. They called the police. We all jumped into our minivan and sped down the street where our friend was last seen. There was only his bike, which had been tossed onto the sidewalk along with his fractured helmet. He has been missing for 15 years now, and as I sit and type this out, I often wonder what happened to my closest childhood friend. We were in therapy for years after this incident. The guilt I live with for not trying to help him or save him is still haunting me to this day. Story number 1. Last year I was working at my local Papa John's Pizza when I received a call that at the time didn't seem that unusual. It was a man's voice. He said that he wanted a large pepperoni and sausage pizza with stuffed crust and a large bottle of Pepsi. I had to ask him to repeat the order 3 times because I couldn't really make out what he was saying, and he sounded like he had a sore throat or was far away from the phone or something like whispering. I typed in the address on my phone's SAT nav and went on my way to deliver the pizza. I arrived at the address the man had given me, and I knocked on the door. A man in his 30s answered the door. I said, "Large pepperoni and sausage pizza with stuffed crust, right?" The man looked at me confused and said, "I didn't order a pizza. You must have the wrong house." I then took out my phone and read back the address I was given. The man then said, "Yeah, that's my address, but I didn't order any pizza." At this point, I was thinking it probably was one of his kids or something who rang up as a prank. That happens all the time. I even mentioned that to the man, saying maybe his kids ordered something. He told me he lived alone, and in fact just got back from work less than 5 minutes ago. I was really confused, but I said to him, "I'm sorry I bothered you," and returned to my car. I started my car and sat there for a second trying to figure out what was really going on. I then took a look at the man's house and saw some weird-looking guy staring at me through a window of an upstairs bedroom. I quickly left the car and ran up to the house and banged on the door. The man answered. I quickly told him there was someone in his house upstairs. He and myself ran up the stairs to try and find whoever was in the house. The upstairs rooms were empty, and so was the rest of the home for that matter. The man called the police and they said they were on their way. As we were waiting, I asked the guy if anyone he knew might sneak in or anything like that. He told me no, in fact. He said his family was on the other side of the country, and he's the only one that lives in the house, because it's where his work is stationed. I pieced together that whoever the man was made the order. It doesn't make sense and it creeps me out. What scares me the most was the man, from what I know, was never found. For all I know, he could still be in that house. Story number 2. I remember a scary encounter I had when I worked for Domino's. I was 18 years old at the time. I mainly delivered pizzas in the evenings and night. It was around 9 p.m. on a Friday night, and I was on my way to a house in a somewhat rural area. The order was 2 large Texas barbecued pizzas. I arrived at the house, and as I was walking up the path towards the front door, I saw someone watching me through the blinds of the window. I thought that was a bit awkward, but whatever. I knocked on the door and for some reason no one answered. I was really confused. Whoever that person was at the window just saw me go to the door. Eventually the door opened, but there was no one there. I looked inside the dimly lit house and said, "Hello, pizza delivery." Then a voice spoke out to me that sounded like it was coming from upstairs. The voice said, "Oh, come in, I will be down in a minute." I have to say I couldn't really tell if the voice was a man or a woman's. I entered the house and waited by the door. The voice spoke out again. "Just put the pizzas on the counter in the kitchen." The kitchen was at the end of a dark hall. As I was walking, the front door closed behind me. I turned around to see no one there. I also walked past whatever room it was that I was being watched from to see no one there. I got to the kitchen and put the pizzas down. The house was creepy, like I said. It was poorly lit and just so silent. No TV, no radio, nothing. Just an eerie, dead silence. I stood there in the kitchen nervously waiting for the owner to come down and give me the money. A few minutes go by and I'm just thinking, hurry up, I want to get out of this creepy house. Just as I thought that, I heard a noise coming from one of the downstairs rooms. I said in a nervous voice, "Hello?" But no answer. This scared me even more at this point. I then walked down the hall to take a look inside the room where the noise had come from. There was someone sat in a chair facing the wall. It was an old woman. She was just staring blankly at the wall. I didn't say anything. I only stared at her, scared as hell. I then heard loud footsteps coming from the stairs. Only it was like someone was running up the stairs rather than coming down. This made me jump. I took another look at the old woman to find her staring at me. This time her expression was far from blank. She was looking right at me with an angry smile. This was more than enough for me to get the hell out of there. I quickly opened the front door and ran as fast as I could to my car. I started my car and took one last look at the house. I could see once again someone staring at me through the blinds. I drove as fast as I could back to my work. I don't know why, but I didn't tell anyone until now. That was the scariest thing I'd ever come across. And to this day, I still have no idea who or even what was going on in that house. Story number 3. My name is Michelle and I'm 20 years old. I work at a Pizza Hut, and last week I had a very strange experience. I answer the phones and deliver pizzas. It was around 6:30 Thursday night when I received a call from a man who had a very deep voice. He asked for 1 large spicy chicken pizza with extra peppers and 1 medium pepperoni pizza with extra cheese for his lady friend. He actually said that. I found it a little funny as well as unusual. I asked for the man's address and told him how much it was and how long it would take me to arrive. The next thing he said was, "Fine." I was expecting him to hang up the phone, but he didn't. I just listened for a second while he was on the line. I ended the phone call after a few awkward seconds. I got in my car, typed in the address in my GPS, and made my way to the man's house. I arrived to the house and knocked on the front door. Not even a second later, the door flung open, startling me. It was a large man in his mid-40s. He had a huge smile on his face. I said, "Hi, pizza delivery. Large spicy chicken and medium pepperoni." He replied, "Perfect," and I handed him the pizzas. As soon as I did this, he immediately walked off back into his house. I just thought he was going to put the pizzas down and come back with the money, but he didn't. A few minutes go by and I was wondering what he was doing. I said, "Sir." He replied saying, "In here, come in." "Do you have the money, sir?" I said. "Yeah, it's in here." I was getting a little bit fed up to this point, and I decided to just go inside, get the money, and then leave. Looking back now, I wish I hadn't. When I entered the man's house, I saw him sat at a dinner table with both pizza boxes open. He gestured for me to sit down opposite him. I said to him, No thanks," along with a nervous chuckle. He then said, "See that one? That one's for my lady friend." And then he pointed at me. That's what he meant on the phone. In his mind, I was his lady friend. This was getting very weird now. No, that's okay. I really should get back to work." He then said, "Come on, you got time for a bit of pizza?" He wasn't getting the clear message. I wasn't interested and just wanted to leave. Not to mention he was making me uncomfortable. I had enough and said, "Sir, if you don't give me the money, I will report this." He then slammed his fist hard on the table, not saying a word, just looking down with a very angry expression. I backed away slightly, unsure of what he was going to do next. He then said in a very different tone, "Now that you've ruined everything, you can leave now." While I had the chance, I turned around and quickly darted out of this man's house. I got in my car and drove away. I went back to work and told my boss about what had happened. He reported this to the police because he never paid for the money he owed. The next few days we received phone calls with no one on the other end. Just the sound of the line still active and someone listening. I think it's pretty clear who the person was. Story number 4. This happened a few years back when I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm from the Philippines. It was a Sunday afternoon around 5 or 6 p.m., and I was at home with my dad. My mom had left to buy groceries about 30 minutes ago using our only car. As I was watching videos on YouTube, the doorbell suddenly rang. It rang quite a few times until I had enough of it. That's when I knew I had to open it. Knowing that my dad was probably sleeping in the other room, I reluctantly went downstairs to open the door. The thing is, I've dreaded opening the front door for people ever since my grandpa scolded me for opening the door to the mailman at his house. He lectured me about how dangerous it could be, like I could be kidnapped or something. With that thought, I climbed on the sofa, which was 3 feet from the front door, and pulled the curtains to see who was ringing the doorbell. Note that the window I looked through was surrounded by a tall fence 4 to 5 feet away, so I felt perfectly safe, and I found it convenient later on once I had talked to him. He had a dark cap on and a blue jumper. He looked very normal to me, but we weren't expecting anyone on a quiet Sunday. I asked him what his business was, and he replied that he was supposed to deliver a pizza to my address. Excited and a bit confused, thinking that my dad secretly ordered a pizza for us, I told him to wait for me to get my dad. I climbed upstairs to my parents' room and saw my dad sleeping. I woke him up and asked him if he had ordered the pizza. He replied with a daze that he didn't. Disappointed, I go back downstairs to break the news to the delivery guy, who probably got the wrong address. But when I got back to the window, he was gone. Since I was pretty young back then, I didn't think much of it until now. Today, I'm certain even my mom agrees to when I told her a story a few years later that I was nearly kidnapped. Number one reason: it was quiet outside and my bedroom window was open, but I didn't hear a motorcycle revving near the house, nor heard it when it left. 2. He left just like that, even though I specifically told him to wait. I didn't say that we didn't order a pizza. 3. I didn't see a logo of the pizza place he was working for. The strange thing was that we only had 2 that were near us, and they had a distinctive red color. 4. I didn't see a motorcycle near him, which was extremely odd. My mom's theory was that the guy probably thought I was alone at home, because our single car was gone. My dad rarely got out of the house since he was unemployed back then. What probably got him to leave was that I told him to wait for me to get my dad. If not for my grandpa scolding me, I would have answered the door and probably not be here writing this to you guys. So stay safe. Number 1. My name is Craig and I'm 15 years old. I love to play ice hockey, and I play on a team. After practice, I always stay behind to work on my shooting. I'm the only one who stays behind while the rest of the team heads home. But I like it that way. I prefer to have the ice to myself. I was doing my thing after practice like usual when I heard some skates on the ice. I turned around to see someone standing at the other end of the ice rink. He was tall, wearing an old hockey goalie mask. He had long black hair and an old Anaheim Ducks jersey on. For a second, I thought it was one of my teammates or coaches playing a prank on me. He was just standing there staring at me. I said, "Who's that?" "Scotty, is that you?" No answer. He then slowly passed a puck towards me, and it slowly stopped right in front of me. He then tapped his stick on the ice like when you call for a pass. I didn't do anything, only stare uncomfortably and confused at this strange guy. He tapped his stick on the ice once more, this time more aggressive. I nervously then passed the puck back to him. He then passed it back to me. I wanted to leave the rink because this guy was creeping me out, and I didn't know who he was. He certainly wasn't a teammate or anyone I knew, but the exit was on the other side of the rink, right where the creepy guy was. He tapped his stick once again, still aggressively, so I passed the puck back to him and he passed it back to me. I spoke out saying, I think I'm going to call it a night." When I said this, he turned around, and I thought that he was going to leave. But unfortunately, he never left, but he walked over to the door to close the door to the ice rink. At this point, I was extremely scared. He then skated fast, really fast towards me. I thought he was about to attack me, but he stopped abruptly right in front of me. Now staring into my eyes, he looked angry. I couldn't say or do anything. I was honestly frightened for my life at this point. This man was much bigger than me and could easily overpower me. He then slid aside, sort of saying that I can go past. I then quickly skated to the other end of the rink and exited through the door. I turned around to see what the strange man was doing. He was just standing there watching me. I walked off towards the changing rooms when I heard a tapping coming from the rink. I don't know who that man was or what he was doing. It was obvious he wasn't all there in the head. This took place about a month and a half ago, and I haven't seen the guy since. I still stay behind after practice, but I'm always paranoid I'm going to hear that tapping on the ice. Story number 2. When I was about 13, I was playing football with 3 of my friends. 2 of them were 13 and 1 of them was 11. The youngest one was a friend's younger brother. We were on the field playing football, having a good time, and at one point the ball got booted over the fence into a garden. We were having a little argument over who should go over and get it. Just as we were discussing it, a man walked onto the field with a football of his own. He said, "Hey boys, you can play with my ball if you'd like." The man didn't look right at all. I couldn't see any children with him, or anyone around the park for that matter, so it was clear he was there on his own. He was wearing a football jersey that was too tight for him, and shorts were way too short. My friends and I awkwardly looked at each other, confused. Then one of my friends said, okay, we will play with your ball. Unexpectedly, the man said, great, so I can play with you. I'm not sure about the rest of my friends, but I thought this was very odd. Why was a 30-year-old wanting to play with 4 young boys who were complete strangers? We were a bit confused, but still we were young and just wanted to play football, so we agreed and let him play. We each introduced ourselves to him, but when we said our names, he gave each of us a hug, kind of like you do with your friends. Only we weren't friends, and the hugs went on for a few seconds longer than they needed to be. The man said his name was Evan. We started to play football and kick the ball around. During our playtime, every time the man tried to tackle, he was always overly physical with us. He would always use his hands to grab us when we were too close to him. He did things that were completely unnecessary. I said, I think I'm going to head home. I'm pretty tired. 2 of my friends agreed. Whether or not they had enough of this weirdo, I don't know. But the 11-year-old kept saying he wanted to stay and play football, as if there wasn't enough red flags going on. The strange man then said, well, he can come to my house and play football. I'll drop him off later. My friend, who is the brother of the young boy, said, no, he has to come home with us. The man then put his hand on the back of the 11-year-old boy and said it's no problem. He can have fun at my house and I will give him back later. I grabbed the young boy's hand and walked him out of the field. The man just stayed on the field looking at us as we walked away. I won't ever forget his face. The man went from smiling and happy to the most bitter, crazed psycho I had ever seen. It was quite clear that that man had only one thing in mind. Story number 3. It was a nice sunny day outside, and me and a bunch of my friends were playing baseball in the nearby park in our neighborhood. We were about 15 or 16 years old at the time. During the game, I went to get a sip of water from my bag when I noticed a hooded man sat on a bench watching us. At first, this wasn't unusual, but I kept my eye on him the whole time we were playing, and I noticed he never left the bench, never met with anyone, and never took his eyes off of us. I thought, yeah, it was weird, but I tried to just enjoy playing baseball with my friends. At some point during the game, I was out fielding and happened to notice the man had gone from the bench. I thought to myself, okay, see, I knew it was nothing. The ball got hit and went over near some bushes next to where the hooded guy was sitting. I was closest, so I ran over around the bushes to get the baseball. I couldn't find it. I looked around while my friends were yelling at me to hurry up. Suddenly, I noticed a man standing, hiding behind a tree. It was a guy that was on the bench from earlier. He was looking at me with a menacing expression on his face. He then pulled something out of his pocket and said, "Looking for this?" It was the baseball. I said, "Oh, yeah, thanks for finding our ball." I put my hands up, gesturing for him to throw me the ball. He put the ball back in his pocket and said, "Come here and take it from me." I hesitated, standing there watching him with nervous confusion. I asked him, "Can't you just throw it to me?" He laughed and said, "Nah, that would be too easy." I didn't know what he meant by that, and I just knew it was nothing good. He then dropped the ball on the ground, about a yard away from himself. There you go. I took one step forward and saw he had one hand in his pocket, and just as I took a step forward towards him, his hand had tightened whatever it was that he was holding. I didn't want to find out what was in his pocket, so I just said, "Keep it." I went back to my friends and said I couldn't find it. It was no big deal, as we always had 4 or 5 extra baseballs with us. The rest of the day, I enjoyed playing with my friends, even though I was pretty distracted. I managed to forget about the guy for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 9 p.m., I was playing Xbox Live and eating Doritos when my mom asked me to take out the trash. As I went outside to my backyard to throw the garbage away, I heard footsteps on the other side of my fence, along with a glass bottle being kicked around. I said, "Hello? Who's there?" Of course, I didn't get a response. I turned around and started walking back inside the house when I heard a slight thud behind me. I turned around to see the baseball from earlier rolling towards me in the grass.
This happened in the early 2000s, and I was around 12 years old. My dad passed away 2 years before, leaving my mom, sister, and myself. To help cope with my father's passing, my mom took me to an animal shelter to pick out a dog, since having a large dog is something I always wanted. In one of the cages was a small shepherd husky huddled up in the corner that right away I fell in love with. When this incident happened, he was 1 year old, 90 pounds. My mom was working nights, and my older sister was taking advantage that my mom wasn't home, and would constantly leave me alone. I didn't mind though, because then she couldn't boss me around. Since when she was home, she would try being mom and telling me what to do, and when to go to bed. We lived in a small middle-class suburb with low crime rate, and I wasn't scared to be home alone. So this night, I was sitting home in the living room playing a video game, and I had gotten up to go to the kitchen to grab a drink. In the kitchen, I had a clear view through the back door, and could see that the garage was open. I headed out to close it. My dog was sleeping in the basement, since he liked to lay on the cold floor during the summer months, and at the time I didn't think of taking him out with me. I step out the door and make it about 5 feet, when I noticed in the darkness a crouched shadow moving in the garage. I froze, trying to get my eyes to adjust to make out what the shadow was. It finally hit me when I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I was terrified and felt like I had been glued to the spot. I knew this person could see me since the back porch light was on and shining above me. At that moment, the figure started running towards me. I was too scared to move and let out more of a yelp than a scream. But that was all it took for my dog to hear, and the next thing I hear is him behind me, snarling and growling. I could make out it was a man, but no features, as he was now frozen, seeing the 90-pound beast behind me. He turned and ran for the back fence with my dog right behind him. The guy made it to the fence, and since it was only 4 feet, he hopped right over it before my dog got to him. After he got away, my dog came running back to me, and we went inside where I barricaded the doors. I don't know why I didn't call the cops, and I never told my mom or sister what happened. One thing that still bothers me was he had to know that I was inside, since the lights were on and the blinds were open. So why did he risk hitting a house where he knew someone was clearly home? The next morning, after my mom was home, I went outside and finally closed the garage, and noticed that he had been going through my dad's toolbox. I locked the garage and never told anyone what happened. I walked my dog to McDonald's and got him a hamburger and an ice cream cone for being my hero. It was early July. I had just begun my senior year of college, but was home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to come stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged because, dat booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating. I returned a couple weeks later. It's now late July, or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing, off campus. We had a main house, the big house, and a smaller house in the backyard, the little house. I needed to clean up the little house as I was going to move into it, since it was left pretty filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time in there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed into a teeny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to another to navigate the room, which we made a game of it, and made great use of them during the weekend. Sorry, bros. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house, and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right, on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6x8 glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozed off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake. I'm caught off guard because it's summer in an empty college town and we weren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment, then the doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepared to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door as if someone was trying to kick it open. Their attempt failed. I'm partially relieved, but I'm still aware that there are 2 doors that they could enter. Lisa is awake now, delirious and frantic. What's going on? What was that? I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house and to go into the bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused, but I demanded. She scurried across the couches and locked herself in the back room. I ran to the far side of the kitchen to make sure the side door was locked. It is. Okay, we're alright for now. Thinking to myself, weapon, what can I use? Shit, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a few arrows. No, that's too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club. 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from the pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen and have a view of the front door and the side door while clutching the golf club, when suddenly the side door knob starts shaking and there's a couple of bangs at the door. Lisa screams from the back of the house and I yell at the intruder. We're in here. We called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone. The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are in the living room, full of couches. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30, and still no signs of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and angry that the cops had not come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi. We called about 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruders make it inside? Yes, we're inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared that they're going to come back. The operator asked me for my address. I'm literally spelling out my address. The front door gets slammed, kicked again. I holler at the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on their way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from the windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding a golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6x8, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the black curtains. And I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I could imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later we hear sirens, and I could faintly see the blue lights swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area, and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick down both doors, and there are boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered by a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunk dude from the trailer park nearby, who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day. This happened very recently, only about 4 days ago, while I was camping with my best friend. We were both seniors in high school, and we were on a road trip for spring break. We live in Oregon, and drove down the coast of Northern California. We had a late start leaving our houses, and arrived at a little beach south of the Redwoods just after 9 p.m. It was pouring rain, and dark out, so we parked on a dirt road that had access to the beach, and decided against walking down the sand to set up camp. My friend drives a Toyota pickup with a camper shell covering the bed, which has a mattress in the back, so we decided to just sleep there. The beach area where we were was very secluded and belonged to a local Native American tribe that didn't mind visitors using the site, as long as they were respectful. After talking for a while in the shelter of the truck, my friend falls asleep. Before drifting off myself, I realized I had forgot to lock the passenger door of the truck. All of our valuables were stored in the cab, so I hoped nobody would come along and rob us in our sleep. After a dreamless few hours of sleep, I heard the sound of the driver's side door handle of my friend's truck begin to lift. The door happened to be locked, and I was awake at this point. Terrified, whoever had been trying to open the door would go around to the unlocked side, or try to get into the bed, where they likely had no idea we were sleeping. It was still dark out at this time, but I heard footsteps start to walk around the back of the truck. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the back of the window of the camper shell, in hopes of alerting the intruder that people were in the vehicle. I heard footsteps get a little farther away. Then I heard the sound of sticks snapping and something heavy being thrown. Then the man let out a long, guttural yell. A few moments passed and more things were thrown, and more general yells mixed with the occasional F-bomb at the top of his lungs. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 yells before I woke up my friend. "Dude, there's a crazy man outside. He tried to get in the truck. Now he's walking around yelling," as I shook his shoulder. My friend sat upright and tried to peer out the window, but it was still pitch black out. I checked my phone, and it was 5 a.m. The sounds of the man walking around the woods near our truck didn't let up. Neither did the frequent yells and sounds of him throwing and smashing what I could only guess were logs or large rocks. Occasionally we would hear his yells from farther away, and we thought he was leaving, only to have him return yelling right by our truck only moments later. We sat huddled in fear for a good hour, unsure what to do. His shout sounded as though he was full of rage, but never attempted to get into the truck again. Eventually, the owners of the other car that was parked on the dirt road came up to the vehicle and drove off as the sky started to lighten. We didn't hear any more yelling or log throwing after that. We eventually were both able to fall back asleep for a few hours, waking up around 10 a.m. It was hard to believe that terrifying hour at the crack of dawn even happened, but both of us remember it too vividly to dispute. We still have no idea what the man was doing or why he sounded so angry. But to the guy screaming profanities in the dark by our truck, let's not meet.
Story number 1. I grew up in New Mexico and was always very into the outdoors, hiking, camping, rock climbing, etc. One summer when I was 19, I went on a 4-day and 3-night camping trip near my parents' house, all by myself. This might sound weird, but I had been to this area many times and it was quite safe. Anyway, I brought my camera and took lots of pictures. When I came back and developed my film, there were 3 extra pictures that I didn't take, of me, sleeping, one from each night. None of my stuff was missing or stolen, and nothing happened, but it freaked me the hell out. Story number 2. When I was barely 20 years old, I was traveling with a small group of people through China, and we were spending about 2 months in Qinghai province, which used to be part of Tibet. Our destination was a specific town to teach English, but we'd be stopping off in towns and small cities along the way. One day we arrived in a rural town, very small, nothing unusual. We spent only a couple of days there, shopping for food at the markets and walking around to see the sights, although there weren't many to see. This was in the dead of winter in February, and all of the grass on the hills and plains around the town was dead and brown. The overall feeling was that of the normal kind of bleakness that any rural place has in the dead of winter. At this time in my life, things were going amazingly, extraordinarily well for me, and I say that because my teenagehood had been rather darkly overcast. But the overwhelming good luck of being able to travel and these close friends I'd made in the last year had more than changed my feelings and attitudes towards life. It was like I was a whole new person. I was ecstatic to be in Tibet, went to sleep with a smile on my face every night. On our second day staying in this small town, I woke up feeling a little odd. Not bad, just odd, like my normal thoughts and feelings had been turned down low, like on a dial. We all decided to go for a walk on the hills right behind the town, where there was a small summit with a pile of rocks and some prayer flags. To be honest, there were little altars like these on every hill, but it gave us something to do. As we hiked up the hills behind the town, I started feeling stranger and stranger. I wasn't scared, and I didn't feel angry or any strong emotion. In fact, it was like emotion was trickling out of me somehow, and I was getting blanker and blanker, emptier and emptier. My mind started feeling a little hazy, and more I felt like I simply didn't care about anything. A small and rapidly dwindling part of myself started to panic, knew that something bad was happening, but it was like my own inner voice was slowly getting quieter. I remember we reached the little summit, and I simply sank to the ground next to the pile of rocks. Without meaning to, I started tuning out the voices around me and fixed all of my attention on the little pebbles in the dirt. I began tapping one against the other repeatedly. Do you know the kind of horror that is opposite of feeling scared or feeling anything at all? The kind of hideousness of a fly buzzing against a closed window for hours on end in an empty room. This is what was filling my mind. It was demonic in its meaninglessness. I touched my face and felt like I was grinning at nothing. Through all the emptiness, the thought floated to the forefront of my mind. You should just die. At first it sounded totally reasonable, but something in me fought it, and I was momentarily troubled. Right then, my group started to walk down from the hill and I followed. The further we walked, the more normal I felt, until we left the town that afternoon, and I was totally freaked out. When another girl, Hannah, mentioned in an odd offhand way that she felt very strange and depressed while staying there, I told her that I had felt the same. When the group leader mentioned that a local had told him that the town had been plagued with a rash of young women under 25 committing suicide, Hannah and I turned white. Story number 3. So when I was a kid, I would race up to the top of the stairs as fast as I could, like it was some sort of silly game. Well, I must have been 5 or 6 at the time. I'm not sure, but I know I was very little. Somewhere along the way, a voice at the top of the stairs started to whisper to me. It would make bets with me, such as, I bet you a penny you can't make it to the top of the stairs. I don't really think there was a certain amount of time or anything. As I said, I was very little, so I probably didn't have any counting abilities anyway. I recall just sitting at the top of the stairs having conversations with this voice, about the betting, of course. Eventually the voice, it was like a whisper of a man's voice, not my own voice in my head, started to bet me my life. Instead of pennies, it would say, I bet you your life you can't make it up the stairs. As I got older, it stopped. I never really thought about it at all. I never mentioned it to anyone. Till one night I was sleeping over at my brother's place. I was about 18, he was 22, and we were talking about spooky stories. Out of nowhere, I brought up the voice at the top of the stairs. My brother got all quiet and weird. Before I even mentioned the betting aspect, he said, "Did it make bets with you?" We both looked at each other horrified. It certainly was freaky after the fact. A lot of bad shit went down in my family at that period of time in my life, and my mother, a heavily religious lady, said there was a lot of evil in our lives at that time. I don't at all think our place was haunted. By the way, it was built in the late 70s, and as I got older, I never experienced anything like that again. Story number 4. When I was little, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and go into my parents' room and sleep next to my mom. One night when I was about 5 or 6, I had this really vivid dream where I woke up scared and went into my mom's room to sleep with her. When I went in, however, there was a set of parents on the bed and a set of identical parents on the floor. I instinctively knew in my dream that I had to wake the right parents, because the wrong parents were evil. So I chose the parents on the floor. I distinctly remember thinking that the evil imposter parents would try and trick me, so I chose the parents on the floor. When I went over to the parents on the floor, they both opened their eyes, and where their eyes should have been was a bright red glowing light. That was when I actually woke up. Being a little kid, I of course went right into my parents' room to sleep next to my mom. There was a set of parents on the bed and a set of parents on the floor. I literally pissed myself. The second set of parents was actually a pile of unfolded laundry, but I will never forget the fear that struck my little 6-year-old heart at that very minute. Story number 5. When I left the reservation for college, I moved to a small town across the state. The town was one of the oldest in Dakota Territory, and I was happy to be living in a place that had roots that went back as far as they did. I loved history, and this felt like a place I could explore and be a part of. I was very wrong. Not long after I moved into the dorms, strange things started happening. I'd hear grunts and furniture moving in the room next to mine, but when I'd ask my RA about the person who lived there, she'd look at me like I was crazy. No one lived in that room. No one had lived in that room for years. It was intentionally kept empty. These noises happened so often I decided to change dorms. The next dorm I lived in was the oldest on campus. Built after a massive flood destroyed most of the town, the dorm was large and always dark, even at noon on the brightest day. Something felt off about the building from the very beginning, but I decided that as finals were approaching, I really didn't need to deal with a naked roommate and her creepy boyfriend on top of studying. I was given my own room, and at first I was very excited to have the space all to myself. The excitement was very short-lived. However, as I began to notice things move out of the corner of my eye, little balls of light shifted and bounced over things. Occasionally I dreamed that something big and black was standing over me, but I was determined to ignore the supernatural and creepy now that I was off the res. Still, I had my advisor send another native in to smudge my room. To be honest, smudging only seemed to make things worse. I began seeing more and more shadows and creepy balls of light. I knew that if I looked directly at them, the light balls would turn into fully formed ghosts. I avoided looking at them for as long as I could, and I did my best to ignore the deep dread that I felt every time I was in my room. I'd only been in my new dorm for a week and a half when I decided that I couldn't take the darkness anymore. I'd been ignoring strange things for the past few days, and I thought that the more light might make me feel less afraid. I went to the local Walmart and bought a large strand of Christmas lights and scented candles. When I got home, I took the lights out of their box and looped them in a circle on top of the plastic bag they'd been in. I sat on my bed to do homework. While I was reading, I noticed a huge ball of light move from the window where the sage was and bounce along the desk I had placed the lights and bags on. A huge gust of wind rattled the window, scared me half to death. It had been quiet, windless night just a minute before. I looked around to see if anything had been knocked over, and I saw the Christmas lights curling slowly around the plastic bag. I was transfixed. There was nothing pulling either end of the light strand, no object placed on or near them that would drag them around by force of gravity. There was nothing natural about the way it caused an air bubble in the bag to form and rise as it twisted faster. The bubble resembled a head, and the lights looked like it was strangling its throat. The dread I'd been denying washed over me. I knew it was a threat. I ran out of the dorm so fast that I only managed to bring my laptop and a change of clothes. I found out later that a girl had overdosed in the room next to mine in the first dorm I was in, and the natives never stayed long in the last. Scary things would happen to them, and each and every one of them would bolt. I also found out that my college town had a long and horrible history of natives being murdered and massacred, with the most recent murder taking place in the 1980s. I decided to transfer out of that hellhole. Thank goodness I did. I know of a few natives who stayed in that town for long. Creepy things followed them everywhere, till they were forced to run for the hills. Story number 6. I was 18 and it was my first time traveling alone. I went to Argentina for 3 months. My first weekend, and I'm wandering around Buenos Aires. At the time I knew enough Spanish to get by, and a man approaches me and asks for directions in Spanish. I tell him that I'm not from here. He then asks me if I'm a tourist. I say yes, and he seems delighted, quickly telling me that he is too. He offers up the idea to explore the city together. I, alone in the big city, agree. We start walking together, and he seems like a really nice guy. After about an hour, he says, "Tango hambre?" I'm hungry. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and it's about 1, so we go to a nice restaurant. He tells me I have to try the steaks and red wine. I'm not much a fan of wine, but he convinces me. We're there about an hour and the bill comes. It's 140 pesos. He pulls out 100 pesos. I try to pay for my half, but he only lets me pay with 40 pesos. He tells me I can get the beers later. We continue on our little adventure and eventually come to a bar with outdoor seating. The waitress brings out a liter of beer and we relax. Soon enough, another liter comes out. We finish the second liter and leave the bar. Then I wake up 8 hours later, missing my debit card, iPod, cell phone, and travel guide. Story number 7. A girl I used to know told me a story that her ex-husband used to wake up in the middle of the night because someone was tickling his feet. She told him her dad used to tickle her and her sister's feet to wake them up for school in the morning. So when weird things started happening around the house, they would just say, "Knock it off, Dad," and it would stop. Well, one day something happened in the kitchen, and she said, "Knock it off, Dad," and as she was walking out the door, something growled in her ear. "I'm not your dad." They moved out a few weeks later. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to subscribe for future content. Make sure you leave a like and comment as well. Email your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. And remember, in this moment of worldly crisis, things will get better. Do not despair in your time of need. Till we meet again, stay sinful.